Let me read to you a passage from the 16th chapter of St. Luke's Gospel, verses 9 to 15. It's the Gospel for Saturday of the 31st week in Ordinary Time. St. Luke writes, Jesus said, I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? No servant can serve two masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. The Pharisees who loved money heard all this and were sneering at Jesus. He said to them, You are the ones who justify yourselves in the eyes of men, but God knows your hearts. What is highly valued among men is detestable in God's sight. That's from Luke chapter 16, verse 9 to 15. We are led to think of wealth. To a very great extent, the course of human history and the lives of individuals revolve around the quest for wealth and material possessions. This is natural because man is part of the material world while not being reducible to it, and so he needs material things. He needs shelter and clothing. Because he is material, he needs material goods for his own consumption and for his future livelihood. There have been many thinkers who have been preoccupied with one thing, man's material needs, and how he can secure material possessions in order to satisfy them. Karl Marx, who lived from 1818 to 1883, held that all societies progress through the dialectic of class struggle, a conflict between an ownership class, which controls production, and a lower class, which produces the labor for goods. The issue was who was to have possession of material wealth. Progress is economic, and it must be classless. That was the view. In this paramount business, religion is a pernicious distraction. For Marx and all such materialists, the real thing is the material world and the material prosperity it could offer us. Let us not digress into the tragic convulsions brought to the world by Marxism. However, even though catastrophic mistakes have been made by certain thinkers who have reduced the laws and goals of human history to economic ones, nevertheless, much of human life and history is indeed, in the nature of the case, economic. It is manifestly the will of the Creator that all gain sufficient and free use of material goods as they need. That having been said, it is fundamental for man to gain a correct attitude to wealth and material possessions. It is not a correct attitude to view material goods as being all that we need, or even what we mainly need. If higher needs are threatened, material goods may have to be sacrificed. For this, we above all look to our Lord for what God has revealed, and our gospel passage that I read earlier from Luke chapter 16, verse 9 to 15, gives us the cue. As our Lord states, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Material wealth is of this world, so it will fail. Let us use our material wealth in the light of our true destiny. Our true homeland is not here, but in heaven. With our true homeland ever before us, and with the gate to it, which is death and God's judgment, ever coming close, we must use material possessions well, so that we make friends, the kind of friends who will welcome us into eternity. The first friend is God himself, and we shall be in his friendship if we do his will. In all our use of money, we must please God, so that it will be a means of union with Him. For we must be ever on guard and ever clear about who is to be the master of our heart. Our Lord warns that no servant can serve two masters. He will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Our Lord asks for our whole heart. As He says elsewhere in the Gospel, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. Material possessions can, due to the fallen condition of our hearts and their profound inclination to place self in the first place ahead of God, easily be used to support this form of self-idolatry. Human history is replete with instances of the overriding quest for material possessions because of the delusion that in them is man's security and happiness to be attained. And thus does man, materially well endowed, sink into the darkness of thinking that he does not need God. God is a phantom, and all that is real is this world, so he must gain as much of it as he can. It is a path, one of several, towards his thinking that he is a God, or like God. This is the primeval temptation, the one seductively presented to Eve and through her to Adam. You will be like God. Material possessions can lead to the glorification of God and to the doing of his will, or they can lead to the glorification of self. In our age, there have been books written on the delusion of God. The ever-present temptation is the delusion into which the self can sink, that I am a God, even if this is not so crassly put. It was the delusion of several of the rulers who arrogated to themselves a divine status, several of the pharaohs, Alexander the Great, and some of his successors, and several of the Roman Caesars. Their possessions and dominions, gained often by massacre and seizure, fed this delusion. For this reason, wealth is not only worldly or of this world, but it tends to be dishonest or tainted because of the way we use and regard it due to our fallen condition. If we love money, it will act dishonestly with us and will taint us. We cannot, our Lord teaches, love both God and mammon. Rather, we must love God and use money and possessions in the loving service of God and our neighbour. Let us ponder our Lord's words in that gospel passage I read in respect to our attitude towards money and material possessions. The world tends to set its heart on material wealth. The Pharisees who loved money laughed at our Lord's teaching. We may not laugh at it, but we may quietly ignore it. If we do, we shall never attain the holiness to which we are called.